In today's video, I'm going to be attempting to create Netflix slider UI, and this is a lot trickier of a UI than it may at first seem, and this is going to be my very first attempt at solving this, so you can see how I go about approaching this difficult problem, what I do when I run into issues, and how I overcome them. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream projects sooner. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create this Netflix-inspired slider UI. And this slider UI is super nice because it has these arrows on the left and right, which move you back and forth by 100% essentially. It has this section at the top that tells you how many videos are left or how many tabs are left inside of this. And if you get to the very end or beginning of the list, it's just going to cycle back in an endless loop, which is really useful. This may look really simple, but it's got a lot of moving parts, and I think it's going to be pretty difficult to implement. And again, this is going to be my first attempt at solving this problem, so you can kind of see live how I think about solving this. So the very first thing I want to do is to create a style sheet. So we're going to say styles.css, and we're just going to link that in our HTML. So we can say link that styles.css. And now I want to think about how exactly I'm going to solve this problem. So the way that this slider works, at least in my opinion, is you have these different items, and essentially they each just have a width based on the size of the screen or whatever. And then when you click this right or left arrow, all it's doing is moving everything to the right or left by essentially 100% of its width. So you can think of these three videos as like the container. And then the left and right are just to the left and right of that container. And when I click right, the entire container moves by 3 video widths, or essentially 100% of the visible portion. And it just continually is going to slide over and over and over. The only time where this gets a little tricky is if you get to the very end of the list, you need to have some JavaScript trickery in order to like do the cycling back for you, but that shouldn't be too difficult, I don't think. And we should be able to implement that on our own. This section at the top here where it kind of shows you like where you are in the tab, again, pretty easy to implement with JavaScript. I think the hardest part is going to be getting that sliding portion to work just fine. So let's kind of start tackling that first. I did look up ahead of time a site that we can use to get placeholders, and I'm just going to use this to give us a bunch of images essentially that we can use inside of our slider. And I want to think about the UI or the HTML for the slider. So first what I want to do is I want to have some type of container that's going to wrap this section right here that has our slider. Then I want to have our slider, and inside of that I want to have the images. And the reason I'm doing that is because the container I want to essentially have like our overflow hidden property, so we can like cut off what is actually being shown. So we can have like a container here, and if I spell container properly, whoops, container, and then inside of that we can have our slider, so we can just call this slider, I guess, and then inside of here is where we want to put all of our different images. So I'm going to use some emmet for this. We're going to have our image, which is going to have a source, and that source is going to be for this placeholder UI right here. So this is just essentially a placeholder image that we can use, and what I want to do is I want to make the size of the image change, and I want to make the text inside of it change as I create more of them. And let's say I want to create 9 of them, I guess. So hit enter. I'm just going to clean up this code a little bit so everything is on its own line. There we go. There we go. And it's just created us 9 different images. And when I click save and come over here, you can see we have 9 different images, and each one of them is slightly bigger than the last. There's a few reasons I'm doing this. One, I want to make sure that no matter what size image I'm using, it's going to scale properly for the video format. Because on Netflix, these different placeholder, images, they could be different sizes. So I want to make sure they're all going to work no matter what size they are. Also, I just want to make sure that it's going to work with multiple images. That's why we have 9. That's more than enough to fill our entire screen. Now to clean this up a little bit more, I'm just going to get rid of these alt tags because we don't really need them for what we're going to be doing. There we go. Make this a little bit wider by getting rid of that sidebar. There we go. So then we have our 9 images inside of a container that we call the slider. Now what we want to do is actually create the CSS just to put this on one line, because right now they're on multiple lines. It looks pretty bad. Let's come in here. We're going to have our container. First of all, actually, what I want to do is I want to get my elements here. So we can say after, before, set up my box sizing to border box. Then we can select our container, our slider here, and then I don't know if we actually gave our images any classes, but for now we can just select them by saying like slider image. So now we have our container, which is going to essentially just be 100% width, and it's going to have some overflow. We have our slider, and then we have our slider images. So the way I want our slider to work is I think I'm going to be using Flexbox for this. That's just going to be an easy way for me to put them all on one line. So if I say display flex, you can now see everything's on one line, and it has a giant scroll bar. It's also going to help a little bit with making sure all of our images are the same size. So the next thing I want to do is on each one of our images, I want to give them a specific width, and that width is going to scale based on screen size. So let's just start with like width 25%, for example. Now we can essentially fit 4 boxes on our screen. Let's see. We can also set an aspect ratio. So let's say aspect ratio is going to be like 16 by 9. And that's going to be a similar aspect ratio to kind of how Netflix has this over here. And I want to have a little bit of padding. So we'll say like padding is 0.25 REM. So that gives me a little bit of space between each one of these elements. And you can notice that their size is actually slightly different than you would expect. That's because Flexbox is like growing and shrinking. A way to get around that is we can say flex 0, 0, 25%. What that's going to do is say flex grow is 0, flex shrink is 0, and our width should be 25%. So it essentially prevents Flexbox from doing any of its flexible stuff. The main reason I'm using Flexbox here is just so we have our child elements inside of each other, fitting inside of each other super nicely. So let's see if this works. Let's say we give it 0 padding. Okay, that looks like it fills the space. Mostly, let's do like 1, let's do 5 REM, kind of see how that looks. Yeah, clearly it's not quite working as I expect because right now we only have 3 elements on the screen. We want to be able to have exactly 4 elements no matter what our padding ends up being. Let's come in here with our container. We want this to be essentially a width of 100%. And our slider should be a width of 100%. Because since we have border box, this padding of 5 REM should be taken into account into this width. Maybe that padding is just like too big. It's bigger than our actual size. So let's change it to like 2 REM. Let me inspect and see what's going on here. Oops, not console elements. So each one of our image components here has a width of 274, that one's 284, that one's 294, 304. Okay, so there's definitely a problem with our images not being sized properly. Let's set like a max width of 25% to see if that makes a difference. Okay, that looks like it made all the difference we needed. I think the reason that this issue was occurring is because we had different sized images, but now when we set our max width to 25%, it's making sure that they never get bigger than that, because by default, our images were actually bigger. Like this 210 pixel image was bigger than 25%, which is why it was giving it that weird issue. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, now let's just change our padding to like 0.5 REM or something, maybe even less, 0.25 REM. It's pretty small on the Netflix site. And there we go. Now we essentially have our 4 elements side by side. And if we want to slide this, all we have to do is take our slider here. We can do a transform translate in the X direction, negative 100%, and boom, now we see the next 4 items. We do another negative 100%, so we change it to 200. Now we see the next 4, even though in our case, there's only one more element because we have an uneven number. So I think that is working as we expect. Yeah, it looks like there's a little bit of the image showing on the right-hand side. When I do like negative 100%, there's a little bit of the image showing on the left-hand side. I think that should be fine though. The reason that's showing up is because we have some spacing on the left and the right of our container based on the body. So the body has some of its own margin. We can just change the margin to 0 and that'll get rid of that. There we go. Okay. Now let me think. Let's change this back to 0. There we go. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make it so our container has a certain size, and that way we can put our icons on the right and the left. So on Netflix, you can see we have the right and the left arrow. What we want to do is just give these right and left arrows a specific amount of space. So we're going to take our container and we're going to do like, for example, we could do 90%. And if we did that, that means that there's going to be 5% space on both sides. That looks like it didn't quite work as expected. So container, 90%, our slider should be full width inside of our container. Oh, one thing that we can do, let's change this to display of flex as well. And then we can justify our content in the center. That didn't quite work as I expected. Make sure this has a width of 100% maybe, or 90%. Let's get rid of the width on that. So we have, yeah, okay, width of 90%. Okay, this looks perfect. So we essentially have 5% overlap on both sides. Or if we wanted to make it a set size, we could do like a calculation here where we do like 100% minus, let's say like 10 REM. That might be huge. That looks pretty good. So now we're saying our left and right side are always going to be 5 REM each. Yeah, so we could even make a variable for that. Let's just say like slider padding is 5 REM. For now, and then we can just say 2 times our slider padding. There we go. I think that should be good. And if we do our translate by negative 100%, Yeah, perfect. So you can see our 4 items in the middle, and we have a little bit of the left side and a little bit of the right side element showing. That looks, I think, exactly like we want it to. We can go back to 0%. The next thing that we're going to need to do is, let me think here. So we have our images. We need to create the actual left and right arrow content that's going to show up. So let me think of the best way to do that. I wonder if we can do it with just a before and after. Probably not, though. That might be a little difficult. So inside of our container, maybe you can say, yeah, let's do it inside of our container. What we could do is we could say, this is going to be like handle, and this will be the left handle, and this one will be the right handle. There we go. And if we select our handle and we give them a width, which is our like slider padding, now let's for now just give them a background color of red so we can see them. There we go. So you can see our 2 different slider sections. And we want to make it so that they're going to show up on top. So we're going to give them a z index of like 10. There we go. That way they show up on top of everything. That looks good. Do we want to give them the same padding? Probably. That didn't do anything it didn't look like. Padding. Because let's see what they do on Netflix. Yeah, they go up like right to the edge of the screen for the most part. Not sure why this padding didn't make any changes. Oh, it's because we're using a background color here. Duh, that makes sense. So these would need to have like a margin. And we want the margin to only be on the top and bottom, so be 0.250. There we go. Yeah, I think that looks good. And then instead of this background color, let's do like an RGBA of 0, 0, 0.5. And that way they kind of get this like grayish looking color to them. And I think we can change our placeholder images to have a color assigned to them by just saying like FF0000. Yeah, so we can change it to, maybe not red. Let's change it to green. Sure, we'll change it to green on all of these. There we go. So we can kind of see a little bit that we have this green section behind this gray section. And if we offset by negative 100% again, yeah, we can see we have the green section behind the gray. And maybe we do like 0.25. Sure, that should be fine. Looks like it's overstepping the bounds a little bit of the actual container. It's like a little bit wider than it should be. One way we can fix this is actually get rid of the width on our slider. And we can change this to just a flex grow of 1. And our handle should be flex grow of 0. And then what we want to do is we just want to have it so that, yeah, actually save that. We can put this back to 0 for now. So now our handle flex grow 0. Yeah, we can just give it a width of, for example, 5 rem for now. And there we go. It'll show up at that exact size. And let's put that negative 100% back in there. It's still overstepping a little bit. I believe it's because of this padding, because this has padding of 0.25 rem. So we would need to like subtract that. And we could say like minus 0.25 rem. That doesn't seem to be doing anything. For now, I'm not going to worry about it because we're probably not even going to hard code this width. What I'm probably going to do is just put this arrow icon inside of here, and then I'm going to have the width be automatically calculated based on that arrow icon size. So yeah, we're going to have it this color, and then we're going to say like handle hover. And when we hover over top of it, what I want to do is I want to take the background color and make it darker. We're going to change it to like 0.5. There we go. I'm also going to give it a cursor of pointer. So we can say like cursor pointer. And I should probably make these handles buttons, to be honest. So let's turn these into buttons because that's realistically what they are acting as. There we go. And then we can just say border done. There we go. Now let's add a little bit of border radius of like 0.5 rem. Maybe we'll just do 1 rem. Okay. And then I can say like handle left. Is that what I called it, or did I call it left handle? Left handle. Border top left radius 0. bottom left radius 0. And I can do the same thing for the right side. There we go. That looks good. We probably also want to make it so that our images have a border radius. Do like 0.5 rem. Whoops. 0.5 rem. And overflow hidden. That didn't seem to do anything. Let's see, what did I use? 1 rem here. What does this look like? 1 rem. 0.25 rem. 0.75 rem. Sure, we'll do 1 rem as well. Make it exactly the same. Don't even need the overflow hidden. Okay. Let's see. So now we need to put the actual arrow inside of here. So that should be pretty easy. We can just say handle. We'll do like left handle after hover content. And in order to get the arrows, I could probably just copy it straight from Netflix, see exactly what they're doing. So we can just inspect this. Okay, so it's this B element. There should be like a content property being set on it probably. Oh, they're using like a font icon kind of thing. That's annoying. So we'll just search for like HTML arrow, or I think it's called a chevron icon. Here we go. And let's just kind of scroll through here until we find what we're looking for. Greater than sign. Here we go. Single pointing angle quotation mark. Maybe that's what we want. We'll just copy that. So we will take the CSS code, which is this very bottom one right here. And we'll just set that as our content. And we'll also get the other one here. I'll just comment it out for now. So the left handle is going to have the 3.9. And the right handle is going to have the 3a. There we go. So now if we go back to here and we hover, it should hopefully show those up, but it is not. Let me make sure that we change the color here to white. We can put that inside of like a handle. I think it was the after property that I used. On hover, color should be white. Let's see what's going on here, why it's not actually showing anything up. Let's force the state of hover. There we go. And I want to get the after element. Oh, it's probably because a button can't have before and after elements, can they? I wonder if Netflix even used a button. Let's see here. They did not even use a button. Interesting. Interesting. And it looks like anytime they hover over the slider, they make the handle show up, not just when they're over the handle. So we can implement that. So we can just change this handle hover here. Anywhere we have handle hover, we just want to change it to container hover. And we want to get specifically the handle. Make sure. And only when we hover over the handle do we want it to get darker though. So I guess that one was correct how we had it before. So yep. But whenever we hover the container, then we want this section to show up. So we can say container hover, get the left handle, container hover, get the right handle. That'll make the content at least show up. A little bit unclear. Oh yeah, it's because we're using buttons, duh. So we can just swap these. I hate doing it as a div. One way we could get around this is we could use the HTML code. So we can just copy the HTML code here, paste it into here for the right side, left side. So now those should show up. There they are, very small, but we can increase the font size pretty easily. We can just say handle font size 5 rem, so much bigger. Text align center. Actually, probably the best thing to do is display flex, align items center, justify content center, color white, and then line height 0, I believe. Because the annoying thing about some of these font things is that They are just very not centered. As you can see, this is like not centered. It looks like it's lower than it should be to be centered. At least to my eyes, that's what it looks like. So let's get rid of the justify and align. Line height. When we do line height 0, that's pushing it way up. And then if we align our items in the center, it's not quite centered, but it's probably close enough. Do like line height minus 0.1. You can't do a negative line height. You do like 0.1. That make it more or less centered. Let's see if I change it to 1. Doesn't actually look like line height's moving it at all. Yeah, the line height's not changing anything. It's not perfectly centered, but it is close enough it probably won't matter. And it allows us to use a button, which is honestly more important for usability. So there we go, we're darkening it when we hover over it. And I think Netflix was making the arrow a little bit bigger when you hover over it. Yeah, so we can do that too. That should be pretty easy. We can just say handle, hover, transform, scale, 1.1. We just want to get the font though. We don't actually want to scale the entire thing. So we can just say instead, font size 1.1 EM. Okay, actually, so we'll just change it to 6 REM. Yeah, that'll work. I like the scale approach so much better though. I'm trying to think of a way we can get around it by doing the scale. Without scaling the entire thing, obviously. This should be fine. We can do transition 150 milliseconds, font size, ease in, out. And then we just need to make sure the width is essentially hard-coded, because that's the only thing I don't like about doing the font size as our scale. So I'd much rather do the transform here. And then we could say transform scale 1.1. That just scales the entire thing. Which really sucks. We would have to do like 2 elements. We would need to have like the dot text. And then inside the dot text, we put the text. And then we can say handle hover and dot text scale and dot text transition. There we go. We'll just do that on this bottom one as well. Okay. That looks like it's working, and we can even make this 1.2 maybe, make it a little bit bigger. There you go. And we can also do a transition on the background color. Nice. That looks pretty much the same as the Netflix one. And they're actual buttons, so now we can tab through them, which I think is really important. And because we can tab through them, we should probably change these selectors up just a bit so that they also have a focus state that works exactly the same. So change this also to focus. So now when I tab, you can see that they have the same animation. I like that. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else we need to do. First of all, we have 2 handle selectors for some reason. I'm just gonna move this up into here. We can get rid of our width. We no longer need a hard-coded width. Do we need these margins anymore? Yeah, we need the margins still. Pointer, font size, all that stuff. Get rid of that. I think that looks pretty good. We probably want to have a little bit of padding in the like XY direction. So we can say padding 0.25 REM. Maybe let's see what 1 REM looks like. So we'll do 0.5 REM. Just gives it a little bit of space. There we go. Because otherwise it was just too crunched up. Yeah, I like this a little bit better. So now what we can do, let's see here. Let's do the sliding real quick. See if that still works. That still works, even though the green section, like the slider section, is wider than our green section. That's still an issue that we need to take into account. Let's get rid of this padding, see if that makes a difference. It does not. I believe it has to do with the padding I'm trying to think. Yeah, I believe it has to do with the padding of our container. So like our slider here needs to have some padding on itself of 0.25 REM. That did not work. It would need to have, actually, it would need to have negative. We need to have a margin of negative 0.25 REM. Now that didn't work either. Make sure it's only in the Y direction. Okay, there we go. We need the margin to be 0.25 REM. I don't know why padding didn't work. Weird. Either way, so now what we've done is we made these sections line up. And the reason I had to add this padding here is just to line up with the padding we had on our images. And that made everything work. Okay. So now let's make it so these left and right buttons just move the slider container position. So we can come in here, we can say like slider index is equal to 0. And we can just say calculate our slider index times negative 100%. So now we just need to increment this number by 1 at a time, and each time we do that, it'll slide our container. So let's create a JavaScript file. Let's import that JavaScript file. We can say script, defer the load of that, and we can just select our buttons. So we can say document query selector. We might as well make this generic so it'll work for actually document.add event listener click. I want to make this generic so it'll work if we have multiple containers on our page, which we'll work on in just a little bit. What I want to say is if e.target.matches .handle, or if e.target.closest of handle. Let's say we'll just call this the handle. So the handle equals nothing by default. And then, yeah, we'd have to do let right here. And then if the target matches handle, then our handle equals e.target. Otherwise, let me see. Otherwise, we want it to equal the closest thing. There we go. So what this little bit of code is doing right here is it's saying if handle not equal to null. First, it's saying, hey, if the current thing that we clicked on is our handle, then make that our handle variable. Otherwise, if we clicked within our handle, then the parent of the thing we clicked on will be the handle. That'll happen if we click like on this chevron. It'll say we clicked on the text element inside of our button, when in reality, we clicked inside of this button as a whole. So that's kind of what that is for. Let me just fix this spacing. There we go. Okay, save that. So now we can go back to here. So if our handle is not equal to null, what we want to do is we want to run some code, and that code is going to be either moving us to the left or to the right. So let's just call it on handle click. And we'll pass it in our handle. Function on handle click, which takes in a handle. If handle.classList. I think it includes .left handle. Then we want to move our slider to the left. Let's get our slider first. Const slider equals handle dot query select, or actually we want to get the closest container. There we go. And then we want to query selector the slider. And this just is going to work no matter what. So this is going to move up the chain. So when we click on our button here, it's going to move up to the nearest container, and then it's going to look inside that container for the first slider it finds. So once we find the slider, now we have it. And what we want to do is we can say slider.style.set property. And we want to set the slider index. We want to essentially just add 1 to it. So we want to get the slider index, const slider index equals, there's called get property value, I believe. We just want to take our slider index. First, we want to parse this as an integer. And we just want to add 1. Actually, we want to subtract 1. There we go. Otherwise, if it's the right handle, what we want to do is we want to add 1. Let's see if that works. Clearly it does not. So let's inspect our page, see what's going on. Console, class list includes is not a function. Let's see, maybe it's just called include. Nope, that does not work. If it's not include, then it's probably contain. So contain didn't work either. Okay, no, it did work. So our code is running, but nothing is happening. Let's inspect our slider. And our slider index is not being set to any value. So slider.style.setProperty. Console.log slider. Let's see what we got going on here. Oh, you know what? This should not say dot left or dot right. There we go. Now we move to the left, move to the right. Looks like moving to the right is not working. Slider index not a number. Slider index should be 0 to start with. Let's see what this value returns to us. So if we look at our console, when we click left, it is returning to us a blank, nothingness. Oh, it's because it should say slider index here. There we go. I should hopefully fix it. Left, right, right, still not working. Slider index NaN. Let's just copy this, paste it down, see what value we get. Inspect. Console, still printing out nothing. Slider index, I believe that is what I called it in here. Slider index, yeah, exactly the same. Let's make sure that we're doing this right. Style.getPropertyValue, yeah, that should be able to get the slider index. Oh, it's because we have to do get computed. You know what? I'm just gonna go to my blog. I know I have an article on this. What is it? Custom properties. Get computed property. Okay. So it's called get computed style. So we can say get computed style. We pass it our slider. And then we call get property value on it. There we go. Just expand that a little bit. Now if we hit right, okay, it's working. We can move right and left, and if we just slap on a little transition for our transform, transition, maybe like 250 milliseconds, oops, ease in out on the transform property. There we go. It works exactly like Netflix's does currently, except for obviously moving backwards doesn't work, and if we move too far forward, that also does not work. Okay. Also, we should probably fix our overflow. Our slider should have overflow hidden. There we go. Ooh, actually, we don't want to overflow hidden here. We want to overflow hidden on our container. There we go. That way we can see the like preview of the next and previous value. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. I'm trying to think. What is the next step? Because we have the simple portion working. Make this a little bit wider again. Let's get the, well, first we probably put a title on this because that's what they have on Netflix. So we can add a simple title. So we have our container and we're going to have like, we'll just call this row. Naming's not the best, but we'll just go with it. So now we have our row, and our row is going to have, let's say like an H3, which just says title. And we're also going to have our like slider index or something. So like progress bar, we'll call it, I guess. Yeah, that works. Okay. And we'll put these just inside of a div for now. And this will just be called header. There we go. what we can do is we can be like, we have our row, header, title, and our progress bar. So our row, we probably don't really need to change anything about. Our header, we want to have it be display flex, justify content space between, to give them as much space between them as possible. We want our header also be the same size as our slider, I think. Let's see how it works over here. Yeah, it's the same size as the slider. So, let me think best way to do this. Because right now we're calculating the size of our slider dynamically based on this handle. So we would probably want to just take our handle and hard code the size on it instead. So we can just say width is 5 rem. That works almost exactly the same. So instead we'll convert it to a variable. We'll say handle size. Handle size 5 rem. And then inside of our row, our row, we can say, our header is going to have padding, which is 0, and handle size. Looks like it's a little bit too much padding, actually. Let's inspect this and see. Yeah, interesting. Let's look at our container here, and our handle has a width of 48.8, while our header padding is probably larger than that. If we look at the computed here, we can see the padding is actually 80. Interesting. Why would the size be different? Flex grow 0. We don't want it to shrink either, so we'll say flex shrink 0. That's probably what's causing our issue. Yeah, there we go. So now we can make our handle size a little bit more reasonable. Let's change it to like 3, 4. 4 looks good. Maybe 3. 4 is a little big. There we go. Now we have our title showing up at the correct location. It also needs to have, let's just say this is going to be our image gap, 0.25 rem. Because we use this variable also in a lot of places. So right here is our image gap. Right here is our image gap. Here is our image gap. And then lastly, we want to have our image gap on our header. So we want to take image gap plus that. We actually need to multiply this by 2. Whoops. There's going to be a padding on both sides. There we go. That'll perfectly line up the left side of this with this, and the right side of our progress bar with the right side over here. Font size on this, I just want to be large again. We'll say like 5 rem. Oh, that's way too big. 3 rem, 2 rem, margin 0. And here we're going to have padding like 0.5 rem, 1 rem. Now we'll say 0.5 rem. Looks pretty good. Okay. And for the progress bar, we're going to have a set number of segments in here, which is going to be determined by the current size of our slider. Which is also kind of determined by our screen size. For now, we're not really worrying about the screen size very much, though. What we could do is for our slider, we could have another variable called like images per, or like items per screen. Set it to 4 for now. And then this width that we have right here is just going to be a calculation, which is 100% divided by our items per screen. So now we can say, you know what, we're going to show 2 things, or we're going to show 3 things, or we're going to show 7 things. And they're all just going to dynamically change size perfectly, which is good. So let's change it back to 4 for now, maybe 3. Okay, there we go. And we can change this inside of a media query. So just as an example, we'll say like at media max width 500 pixels. Now let's make it like 1,000 pixels. We can take our slider and we can change that value, which we called items. What did we call it? items per screen. So we can take our items per screen and we could, for example, change it to 4 here. And now if we just inspect this, go into this mode, minimize that down. And as we change our screen size to be smaller, you can now see that there's 4 items, and when it's larger, it's 3. Obviously, we would want to flop this. So like this would be 3, and up here, this value would be 4. So now, as we shrink our screen, now it's showing 3 items. And as we shrink it more, we can make it show more and less items. So I think that's a really good idea. For example, when we got to this size screen, we could change it to 2 items and so on. So all you'd have to do is find your breakpoints to fill out the rest of these. We're not going to go through that because it's kind of boring to do that. So, but that's how you would do it. Okay, close that out. But we are going to use this item value within our JavaScript, I think, to determine how many elements are inside of our progress bar. So I don't think there's any easy way to do that inside of CSS. We can't like dynamically change the number of elements shown. So inside of our script, we need to have some kind of event listener. Let's minimize both of these on our window. And this is going to be a resize event listener. So whenever we resize, we can recalculate the like progress bar essentially. So for now, I'll just say like recalculate progress bar. And let's kind of see what an example of a progress bar would look like. We're going to say like progress item. And then I'm just going to put like a couple of those, and we'll just say that this one is the active one for now. So let's style what our progress item looks like. So we have a progress bar, which we want to be a display of flex, I think. Progress item is going to be a flex of 0, 0, and 1 rem maybe. Height of 0.5 rem, background, color, red, just so we can see it. We're going to put a gap on here of like 0.5 rem. So let's make this a little bit bigger. We'll change this to 2 maybe. And we'll change this to 1. Gap 0.5. Yep, that makes sense. Why is there only 2 of them being shown? That's kind of interesting, like going off the screen like that. Progress bar. So the progress, let's see if we can change this to a flex of 0, 0. That didn't make any difference. Flex 0. Flex shrink 1. Interesting. Let me just kind of inspect and see what's going on. A little bit confused. So we have our title and then our progress bar section. Our progress bar should be filling up more space. Like it definitely should be filling up. Like it's got room for more space, clearly. Progress bar item. It's got that flex 2 rem. Get rid of the display flex on it for now. Maybe we need to set like a max width of 2 rem. Min width 2 rem. Okay, it looks like the min width fixed it for us. Interesting. So I thought the flex basis being set to 2 rem would work just fine. The main reason I'm doing display flex here is so they can easily show up on one line and like I can easily center them if need be, but interesting. So let's see how they styled these on the Netflix side. So they just have like it looks like a partially transparent background that is white. So we can say, we'll make ours black. Well, I guess no, we can make it white. We can just change our body. Background color. And our color to white. Hopefully that'll work. There we go. So now we just have black instead of white as our screen. And now we can change this to be 255, 255, 255, 0.5. And then the active one, progress item active is just going to be like 0.75. Maybe 0.9. There we go. And now we can just change how we want these to be sized. So I think I want them to be a little bit smaller. And maybe make the gap between them a little bit smaller. Is that like what they look like on Netflix? Netflix has them wider, but shorter. Like that, pretty much. Or like 1.5. There we go. That's pretty close. Good enough for me. So now we can change whichever one is active whenever we click the start, like the left and right buttons. And by default, we just want the first one to be active. And then when we click next, we want to move the active one over. But we also need to calculate how many of these progress items we want to show, because by default, this is going to be blank. So I want to create a function called calculate progress bar. And I'm going to pass it in container. Oh no, we're going to pass it in the progress bar itself. So we can say like progress bar dot, what do we want to do? We want to, let's take the inner HTML, set it to an empty string. That'll just clear everything out. Then we can say like progress bar, we want to get the child row, and then we want to get the slider inside of that. So closest row dot query selector slider, and that is going to give us slider. And we can say item count is slider.children.length. That'll give us the exact number of items, and then we can get to the const items per screen, which is going to be coming from our CSS. So we can just say, copy this, paste it here. What we called this items per screen. I believe that's what we called it. Let me scroll up to the top here. Items per screen, yeah. So now we got the item count, items per screen. What we can do is we can get the progress bar item count, which is just items per screen divided by item count. And we want to get the ceiling of that. There we go. Perfect. Now we can just loop. So we can say for let I equals 0, I is less than progress bar item count, I plus plus, const bar item equals creating an element, which is just a div. We want to add the class to it, which is just progress bar item, I believe. Progress item is what we called it. Oops, progress item. And then if it's the active one, we will give it the active class. So we also want to get the slider index. I'm just going to copy this. Slider index. So if I is equal to the slider index, then bar item dot classlist dot add active. And finally, progress bar dot append bar item. So now we should just be able to call this function. So I can say like document dot query selector all the progress bars. What I want to do is I want to loop through each one of them essentially. So I can say, actually I don't need to do that. I can just say for each bar, call that function. So I can just say for each one of them, call that function right there. And let's see if it worked as we expected it to. So we have one item inside of there. I think I have something wrapped in an if that shouldn't be. So our items per screen should be 4. Slider in, or the item count should be 9. Items per screen should be 4. 9 divided by 4 should give us like 2 point something. It should round up to 3. Let's see, console.log progress bar item count. Let's see what that logs out. 1, of course. Let's get our item count to see what that prints out. That is printing out 9, okay. Items per screen, this should give us 4. 4, okay. Why then, when we divide them, do we get 1? Items per screen. Oh, I have this swapped. It should be the item count divided by the items per screen. There we go. Now we have 3 things on our progress bar. And then all we need to do is when we click the buttons, so when we change our slider, what we want to do is we just want to change the active index for the progress bar. So I think the best way to do that, what we could do is we could say we want to get the progress bar, which is getting the closest row, and I want to get the progress bar. And then I say progress bar dot children of slider index dot class list remove active, and then I can take the slider index -1 and add the class list active. That should be all I need to do. Do that in both sections, but this one will be a plus. Now let's see if I click that button. There we go. You can see that our slider value is moving up here. Perfect. That is working as expected. Obviously, we don't have the looping action done yet, but that's for a later point. So we have the progress bar done. We probably want to center it. So for our header, we'll align items center. Whoops, center. There we go. Looks a little bit better that way, I think. Got our title. There's not too terribly much left. We want to make this a white background instead of a black background because we changed our background color. And then we want to do it. Where's the other place? Here it is. There we go, because I think that works how Netflix's does, or close enough at least. It doesn't really matter if it's perfect, but it works. Okay, that's what we'll go with. Let me think if there's anything else left that we need to implement now. So we have the sliding, besides obviously the looping. I'm going to change it so we just have 8 elements in our thing for now. There we go. That way we have kind of like the perfect number to always work with. Or maybe I'll make it so there's 12. So I'm just going to copy these 4. I'm going to change the text. So 9, 10, 11, 12. There we go. That way we can have like a middle page, we have a beginning page, and then we have our end page, obviously. Okay. So I think we're finally on to the looping portion, which was the part I was looking forward to the least, to be honest. Okay. Because it could implement quite a lot of changes, but I'm hoping not. So when we are at the very end of our list, let's think about that scenario first. What I want to do is I just want to essentially copy my slider and add it back onto itself, kind of. I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Because we have our slider. I just want to like add these 4 elements to the end. And then when I move, I obviously want these 4 elements to be at the beginning. That's really tricky. Because I can like put another slider directly after this slider. Let's see how the Netflix one does it. So if we go back, it just keeps cycling left. But it's seamless, you know. What is the best way to do this? Because like I said, we could just like duplicate these 4 elements. Like if we're at the end, we could duplicate the first 4 elements and put them back at the end. And that's kind of going to emulate that idea. You know, you can see we hit next and it starts back over at the beginning. But when we do that movement, we would need to make it so that our gosh, what is the best way to do this? We almost need to make it so like our entire slider just like moves itself, like it clones itself. But it's hard to make it smoothly scroll. Because we could obviously make it so that when we click next here, it just scrolls back to the very beginning. And that's pretty easy to do. So I'll kind of emulate that. So we could say slider index. We want to get the items per screen and the item count here. We want to get all this information. I guess we could just use the progress bar for that. So we can say like const progress bar item count equals that dot children dot length. And we can say if progress bar item count, so this item count would be like 3, and if we're on index 2, so if it +1 is greater than or equal to our slider index, then what we want to do is we want to just reset our slider index to 0. We would just do this, set this value to 0 here, and this to 0, and then we put this inside of an else. So now when we get to the very end, okay, I broke something. Progress bar item count +1. Oh, we want to get the active one, not the count. Oh, we want to see if the slider index is greater than or equal to this. There we go. We want to do the +1 here. So now when we get to the very end, it's just cycling back to the very beginning. That is one easy way to do that. We can do the exact same thing up here. So I can say like if the slider index is less than 0, -1, then what I want to do, copy this in there, is slider index is, I want to move it to my progress bar item count -1. Yeah, I think so. So now when I hit left, yeah, it moves it to the very end. That's definitely one really easy way to get around the issue. And this is how I believe like other sites like Amazon maybe does it, like Amazon Prime. I know a lot of other sites do it this way because like as you can see, the code is way easier to implement it this way. Let's do this recalculating in the progress bar real quick. And I'm actually gonna go back to my blog here because I just wrote an article on throttling and debouncing, which is perfect because we want to implement that for this resize event so it's not too slow. So I'm just gonna do, let's just do a throttle, I guess. Yeah, throttle should work fine. Okay. So let's just copy over the function completely. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to say like const throttled progress bar, yeah, equals throttle, and we're going to pass it in here. All we want to do is just this, calculate the progress bar for each one of them. We're going to do like 250 millisecond delay. We're going to call that function when we do the resize. That's not quite all that we need to do though. That's going to be part of it, but we also need to, no, actually that should be all of it because the CSS takes care of the rest. So now if I just inspect my page, change it into mobile mode. Now what should happen is, as you can see, we have 3 here. When I decrease my screen size to 3, you can see this updates to 4. I do think I need to fix, I guess I don't need to fix the slider index because that'll stay the same. Because when you're resizing your screen, this could mess things up. So like the slider index right now, if we go to this page, is on 1. Like technically it's 1. We're on the second page. So that means when I decrease my screen size, we're still going to stay on the second page, but the amount of videos we're showing on that page may change. I think that is a fine implementation. So now as you can see, this progress bar is perfectly updated. And if we change our CSS to include another breakpoint at like, let's say 500 pixels, where we change this to 2, we decrease this far enough, you can now see, again, our slider has changed up here and we can move around. Now this will break when we try to increase our screen beyond the maximum. So what I want to do is I want to have in here, I essentially want to like cap out our slider index at a specific value. So let me think. So we have our progress bar item count. That's the number of progress bars. So if slider index is greater than our progress bar item count, then I want to set our slider index by saying slider.style.setProperty slider index to our progress bar item count -1. This should be greater than or equal to Yeah, that should work. And then we can say like slider index is equal to that. Make this a let. Let's see if that works. So move to the very end here, decrease the size, move all the way to the end. And if I increase the size, as you can see, it's moving me back to the proper slider index. Increase the size again. And again, it's moving me back to the very end of the list if I'm past the end of the list. But obviously when I'm shrinking, things don't make a difference. And if I'm at the beginning, for example, and I increase, again, it doesn't make a difference. It only makes a difference if I'm at the end of the list. And by decreasing or increasing my size, I now change it so that I no longer have that page. I only have 3 pages now instead of 4. So if I was on the 4th page, move me to the 3rd page. There we go. That works perfectly. So I just paused the video here to look at the time, and it looks like we're pretty much right at an hour for the video. So instead of trying to scratch my head even further to implement the like wraparound feature they have here in Netflix, I think we're going to keep it with what we have because we've implemented essentially the same functionality. It just works in a very ever so slightly different way, but in my opinion, is still just as good of a feature. Now, if you enjoyed that, you're definitely going to love my multi-step live solve video. That's linked over here. And with that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.